Well, thank you guys for being here. My apologies for being late, and thank you for coming at the last minute. You know, I have joked throughout this campaign that I'm a Norwegian Lutheran from northern Minnesota, and I don't get really worked up or all that emotional about things, but the past 24 hours and this governor have practically put me over the edge. And I believe that the Minnesotans who are being hurt by the breathtaking incompetence of Governor Dayton ought to be mad as hell right now, and I don't think they ought to be willing to put up with it anymore. Governor Dayton's incompetence is hurting Minnesotans, and I think it's time that someone actually calls him on it. What have we learned in the past 24 hours? Number one, MNsure. Mark Dayton was desperate to be the first governor in the country to implement Obamacare in Minnesota through MNsure. He got to handpick his board, he got to handpick his staff, and it has been an unmitigated disaster since day one. But all the failures we've seen up to this point pale in comparison to the bomb that was dropped on thousands of Minnesotans today. 6 out of 10 of the Minnesotans who have gone through the nightmare of trying to get insurance through the MNsure exchange learned this morning that they're going to have to go through that same nightmare all over again, probably in a matter of a few weeks. And likely, in order to get new insurance that has a much higher price tag than the one that they already had. It's actually hard to believe what's happening right now. Number two is the Thomas Duvall case. After putting countless victims of one of the worst sex offenders that we've seen in this state through hell for nearly a year by suggesting that he'd be willing to let this guy out, the governor last night in the 11th hour, the night before the 4-day trial, says, oh, we've changed our mind, we're not going to do it anymore. Now, I'm glad that he changed his mind, because I think it was insane that he was considering letting this guy out in the first place. But this matter was so mismanaged, without any regard to the victims or the victims' families of this guy, that it just takes your breath away. Mark Dayton is not competent to lead this state, and we have seen it in the last 24 hours in 2 ways, unlike anything we've seen before. And I think that Minnesotans should say enough is enough and defeat him. I'll take your question.
Is that the end of Mr. Nice Guy for you?
I'm still a nice guy, but good grief, you know, I can give you, Don, lots of examples of where I don't believe he's been up to the job, where I don't believe he's been incompetent, but literally in the last 2 hours, we have not, these 2 examples absolutely are worse than anything we've seen thus far.
Seriously, is this going to change the tone of the campaign?
I don't know if it'll change the tone of the campaign. To me, though, I have not talked as much about competence as I have about other issues, but it has concerned me. But with these 2 examples today, I will probably be talking a lot more about that.
So it'll get more personal, not policy, it'll be more personal.
I'm not sure it's personal. I think the question is whether he's up to the job or not, whether he knows what he's doing. I'm not sure that's personal. I'm not making a personal attack on him, but I don't think he's up to the job.
Based on what has occurred today with MNsure, if you are elected in November and you take the reins in January, what's your solution to this issue? Knowing, and I know you talked about the fact that you want to, get approval from the federal government, but there's a short-term issue and a long-term issue.
Right. If we can't get a waiver, and I still believe that we could, I still think it's possible, and I'm not going to give up on that. But if that doesn't happen, then you got to have Plan B. And I don't get to get rid of MNsure. I don't get to get rid of Obamacare as governor. So I think what we've got to do is, number one, replace the board. Number two, replace the staff. They've been complete failures, and the fact that they are still in place, I think, is crazy. Number three, do whatever you can to increase competition within MNsure. I think we changed the rulemaking process. They essentially have given themselves a way out of the normal rulemaking process so that there is actually less public input than when an agency usually makes rules. And then I think we do, as I said before, you try to remove as many barriers as you can to the private sector actually competing with MNsure, and that probably means removing some mandates.
So you'd replace the entire MNsure staff, top to bottom?
Likely I would. I would certainly, let me rephrase that and say that I would certainly replace who's at the top, and maybe who's at the top can decide whether people stay or not. But I would replace the entire board, at least the ones that the governor can appoint.
And in terms of this rulemaking process, what would you do? Because I think the rulemaking process was supposed to lessen the number of limitations and strings on what they were doing, wasn't it?
Well, my understanding is that the rulemaking process was streamlined in order to limit public input, and I think that's always the wrong direction to go.
Minsure officials today tried to say this development was strictly a business decision, in essence that Preferred One basically priced themselves out of the market by making plans too cheap and had to exit. What do you make of that?
Well, I think they did make their plans too cheap. I think there was probably some pressure to make their plans cheap. And I think they found out that the governor has been touting that we had the lowest rates in the country, and they were clearly artificial. It was all a house of cards. And now 60% of the policyholders, 60% of the Minnesotans are going to have to go through this whole nightmare again. So it was a business decision. Their prices were too low. The Minsure system can't sustain the prices that they put out there. They also, however, said that it was an administrative nightmare, I think was the words that they used, and that the Minsure system couldn't even ensure that the people in the Minsure exchange were Minnesota residents. That's incompetence at its highest form.
Who pressured Preferred One?
What I have heard from at least some within the insurance industry is that the administration pushed hard for insurers to have as low a price as possible.
What's wrong with that?
Well, if you force them to have a price that is not sustainable, we've seen today what's wrong with that. It all falls apart, and now all of these Minnesotans, thousands of them, are going to have to go through the whole process again.
Well, there's a difference between pressuring and forcing. And you just used the word force them. Did somebody go beyond pressuring and force them to
Yeah,
have
I don't know
rates?
if anyone forced them. Obviously, they could have chosen not to get into the market at all.
Or they could have chosen the same rates as others, similar rates to others.
That's right, and then the governor wouldn't have been able to tout the lowest rates in the country, which he has used quite effectively politically, but again, they were false, they were fake.
So are you alleging some type of collusion between the governor and Preferred One here?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that there was pressure on Preferred One. I'm not sure they wanted to do it this way, but I think there was definitely pressure on it.
Leaving aside the particulars of the Duval case, do you generally acknowledge what seems like warnings from Judge Frank that there is gonna have to be some sort of changes to the MSOP that would allow for provisional release or release of some of its residents?
Absolutely, and I don't think we can deny the fact that the courts have made it crystal clear that we need to do something to change the MSOP system, or the courts are going to do it for us, and I can guarantee you we won't like what the courts do for us. And that has been a huge disappointment that I've had with Governor Dayton. He needed to show some leadership on that. Some changes have to be made, and they're tough changes politically, I think. He was unwilling to step up and lead the charge. Essentially what he said was, well, we know we've got to do it, legislature, go figure it out. And when the legislature couldn't figure it out because it's such a politically charged issue, he threw his hands up and said, well, they can't figure it out, we'll wait until after the election. That's not leadership, and it actually puts a lot of people in Minnesota at risk, because if the court does step forward and start releasing dangerous sex offenders, and we look back and say, well, we could have fixed this in a different way, that's going to be a bit of an indictment on the governor, I think.
So Commissioner, what's your solution to this issue?
I've got several different ideas. I would like to see a life sentence without parole for the most violent serial sex offenders, which are many of the people within MSOP. But I don't get to shove my decision down the throats of the legislature. What I have said I'd do is, on day one as governor, is sit down with the Republican leaders in the House and Senate and the DFL leaders in the House and Senate and figure out what it is that everybody can live with without attacking in the next election. That's the only way it's going to get done, and the governor is the only one who can do that, and he's simply been unwilling to.
But in terms of, you talked about life sentences for folks who are going into the system, but there are people in the system that can't get those life sentences now. So, I mean, you just talked about leadership on the governor's level. What could you stomach on this issue where there's a lot of, politics and potentially
Right.
sensitive issues.
Right, I'm not sure what I could stomach, to be honest with you, and I think it's gonna be a matter of sitting down with these people and having some very frank discussions about what everybody can stomach. And, you know, maybe what I can stomach will change over the course of a day or two of talking about it.
And you mean literally on day one, the first day you're in office, did you bring them in?
That is, I've answered that question before, actually. The first thing I would do, I don't know if they could all meet with me on day one, but we'd certainly start that process of setting something up. That would be a top priority.
What about this whole issue? You've used the term incompetence before, and then you stopped using it pretty much around after the primary was over. How sensitive is that issue, and how much is this going to polarize this election, which is already starting to get a little bit, the elbows are starting to get a little sharper?
I have used it consistently throughout the campaign. And I don't relish going on the attack. It's just not who I am. So I'm careful about what I say. But I do believe that Governor Dayton is not competent to be governor, and these two examples make that crystal clear, I think. So I will continue to make that crystal clear, I think. So I will continue to talk about that. And again, there are other examples, but these two, especially the fact that they happened at essentially the same time, and the only thing he seems to want to talk about is Adrian Peterson, as opposed to these two issues, is rather telling, I think.
Did you shoot a commercial today?
I did not.
What are you going to do this week?
Sometime this week.
Is it going to be, are you changing it maybe to go along the lines of what you're telling us today?
I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not sure what exactly it's going to look like.
Are you going, back to my earlier question, are you going to be more likely to attack than, I don't know what word you want to use, but
Yeah. I don't think it's
otherwise?
attack. Yeah.
Being harsher, whatever word you want to pick out.
I'm not necessarily an attack sort of guy, but I am going to be quite comfortable both presenting a contrast of what our visions are and pointing out the fact that I don't think he's competent to be governor.
Do you disagree with what the governor said about Adrian Peterson today?
I don't believe Adrian Peterson should be playing until this whole thing clears up, but honestly, if this is what he wants to talk about, we literally had a bomb dropped on thousands of Minnesotans with respect to MNsure and their health insurance. And we just had an 11th hour reversal after nearly a year of putting victims of the sex offender through hell, and all he wants to talk about is Adrian Peterson. I think that's sad.
Today's fundraising deadline. Are you doing any fundraising events tonight? Have you been making fundraising calls today?
I have not been making as many fundraising calls today as I had planned on making. But yeah, we'll do a little bit of fundraising to finish up today, yes.
What can we expect from you and your reports coming out tomorrow morning?
It won't come out for another week, so I probably won't share that right now, but I feel good about where we're at.
Do you at all, just on the issue of money and obviously the outside groups, DFL, Alliance for a Better Minnesota, they're all dumping a lot of ads on your head. And there aren't a lot of groups right now who are coming to your rescue. Are you at all nervous about that?
No, I mean, I gotta run my campaign. There's nothing I can do about outside groups, and if they weigh in later, that is fantastic and helpful, but honestly, I'm worried about what we're gonna put up on TV.
Do you think it creates a problem that, the other side has, basically been trying to define you early and there's been nothing on your side to counter?
Well, I think there has been some outside money on the other side, but, we're gonna get outspent. We know we're gonna get outspent. The campaign might not get outspent, but outside groups, they knew going into this that the Democrats were gonna spend a lot more from outside groups than the Republicans will, and our plan is based on it.
Back what you were talking about the governor. Al's question made me lose my train of thought.
You're welcome.
How big of a
I know one, if you can remember yours. Have you been talking to your supporters about these two issues today, the sex offender and the MNsure issue? Or has it just been boiling up inside you?
Yeah, no, I honestly, I have not been talking to my supporters much at all today. We had several different events, including a county board meeting that I was at, so it's more about what I'm thinking right now than anything else.
And where does MNsure rank in terms of do you think that MNsure ranks in terms of importance for the public? I mean, you hear a lot about education, jobs, the economy. Where does this rank?
I'm not gonna give it a number, but it's certainly one of the top issues, and I'll be talking about it a lot, and probably even more now. Any other questions? All right, again, my apologies for being late, and thank you guys for coming, appreciate it.
Did you bring the train?
What's that?
Did you ride the train?
No, we actually got stopped by a train, and that's one of the reasons we were late. We sat behind it, or in front of the train for about 5 minutes.
In that old cheap Liberty?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Sure.
When you're very
Jeff
welcome.
Kyle,
Thank you.
Thanks again.
No, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for traveling with us.
You don't look like your avatar, maybe I didn't zoom in.
I don't think I have a face in that
Jeff
one, which is
Johnson.
probably good.
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Yeah, good to see you too.
We're gonna post all that in this guide always, we're going.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. See you. Thanks. See you guys.
Yeah. No, the deadline is tonight.
Take some more, count that.